We are live now. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our live virtual discussion with our guest artist, Ashley V. Blalock. Welcome tonight. I'm going to just say it again, this is a live recording and there could be glitches and there could be interruptions, but we're glad you're here and we are really looking forward to discussing Ashley's work in the exhibition Beyond Intention here at Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art. It is January 25th, 2022. And if you are joining us on Montana Standard Time, it's about 5:33. And if you're joining us from California time, which is where Ashley's at, it is 4:33 Pacific Standard Time. So welcome to everyone watching. I'm going to go ahead and start our screen share so we can begin our discussion. One second. Oops. I went backwards on me there. Welcome everyone again. As you can see, we have Ashley V. Blalock with us today. Thank you very much for being here from Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art in Great Falls, Montana. This is our lovely institution. If you haven't seen it, here's a little bit of a picture of what we look like in spring. Currently, it is snowing outside and we do not look as lovely as this. But if you come to see the exhibit, it's full of color and joy as well. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting the institution, for supporting exhibitions like this that bring education in the arts to Montana and to the community of Great Falls, Montana as well. Thank you for supporting the artists who work so hard at presenting new works of art that they are working diligently on to contribute to the creative culture of the United States and the world. So thank you for doing that for us. Welcome. Ashley V. Blalock's work is integrated into an exhibition titled Beyond Intention, also featuring the work of Jennifer Reifsneider and Maggy Rozycki Hiltner. Ashley's talk is actually the last and final talk related to this exhibition, so we are grateful to have her here with us. I'm going to read a little bit about this exhibition and we will continue our discussion. Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art presents Beyond Intention, an exhibition that showcases the work of 3 contemporary fiber and mixed media artists, Maggy Rozycki Hiltner, Ashley V. Blalock, and Jennifer Reifsneider. The exhibition, curated by Nicole Maria Evans, aims to address the topic of intention as it relates to the profound relationship between the tradition of fiber arts in women's lives, as well as its power in the making or breaking of identity, social roles, and societal constructs. The exhibition is comprised of 3 distinct presentations of work by each artist that inquire into the meaning of intention as it pertains to them individually. Materials, process, and narrative form part of the visual conversation as they repurpose, reuse, and redirect meaning in a multidimensional way. Works shown utilize established techniques like crochet, needlepoint, quilting, knot tying, and pattern making, but reimagine their purpose and use by transforming them into artworks that go beyond intention. This is a view of what the works look like in a cohesive manner during the exhibition in the separate gallery spaces. And here we'll begin. I'm going to read a little bit about Ashley, and then I'll give Ashley the floor to begin presenting her work. How does that sound, Ashley?
That's fine.
Okay. Ashley V. Blalock. Ashley was born and raised in San Diego, California. She holds an MFA in sculpture, installation focus from the San Francisco Art Institute, an MA in art history from the University of California, and a BA in painting and printmaking from San Diego State University. She was a resident at Skowhegan's School of Painting and Sculpture, Wassaic Project, and Vermont Studio Center, and a visiting teacher at Aramont School of Arts and Crafts. Her solo installation venues include the Nevada Museum of Art, Lux Art Institute, the Lion Brand Yarn Studio in New York, and the Last Bookstore in Los Angeles. Her work has been exhibited in group exhibitions at, how do you pronounce this? ESXLA?
Yeah, I get ESXLA. Sorry.
Okay. I'm just asking in case.
I don't think I ever asked when I was there.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Mini art. What does it say? Miniature. What is it?
I think it's Mini Art Textile, perhaps,
Okay, Mini Art
but
Textile.
somebody
Yes.
don't quote me on the Italian on
No,
that
I
one.
think you're right. In Como, Italy, the Craft in America Center, Huntington Beach Art Center, Oceanside Museum of Art, Menge International Museum, and the Whatcom Museum. Her site-responsive installations have been placed in and around historic homes such as Edith Wharton's home, Highfield Hall, and the Heritage Museum and Gardens. Upcoming solo installations include, but are not limited to, the Hunter Museum of American Art and Franconia Sculpture Park.
And those are already brought to fruition now.
Mm-hmm. And you're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Yeah, that's exciting. And I think we'll conclude right there on that. So welcome so much, Ashley. Thank you for joining us from your home. And I'm going to go ahead and open the floor to you to begin a bit of your discussion here of your work at Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art.
Okay, well, and thank you for having me. It was a great experience coming there, going out, doing the installation, which all of the works that I'm doing, they're site-specific installation. So there have been a few exceptions to that, but very few, and kind of under my control. I guess I'm a bit of a control freak. So, but basically they're responding to the space. So for this one, we had Keeping Up Appearances, which is the red one that's on the screen. So that was out in the main hallway. And then, and it kind of, moves and flows through the space on the ceiling, down low, up high. It's difficult to look at a photograph and really experience that piece because, it changes when you walk through it, all the different angles and the different perspectives in that. So this is all done with crochet. These are all doilies, well-known doily patterns. Well known to people like me, I guess. We're into this sort of thing. But a lot of people will come through and recognize some of these patterns and say, oh, that's, familiar. And some of them I'll see, and I can tell you, kind of where they came from, and that sort of thing. And then the other one is the Yellow Wallpaper. So those are two installations in this specific exhibition.
So tell us a little bit, just so that individuals who are not familiar with your work, or maybe a little bit about how you begin this process. What is your process from beginning to end when you are invited, such as here at the Square, to do an installation work like this?
Well, this series goes back some 10, 11, 12 years now. So I've been working and making the red forms all that time. I haven't done a count recently of how many I have, but it's over 100. I know it's over 100. The largest one that's only been shown once is 25 feet tall. So I do have one doily that's 25 feet tall, and then they range on down to 2 feet, even smaller, maybe a foot's my smallest. So I'm add on as needed. So when someone contacts me and says, okay, can you do it? First question is, how big is it? And then I've got to look around at the time and the material I have on hand, and then figure out, what I need to do. Do I have the time to add on to this? It's just constantly adding on, and parts go off here and get shown, and then they come back, and then parts go off to another place. And then usually it's looking at floor plans and images. I rarely ever get to do a walkthrough before I show up, which I kind of feel better about, because I don't know, it's kind of exciting in a way to, I mean, I'm not a gambling person, but in a way I am, because I kind of like to just roll the dice and show up and figure it out there. But I get a rough idea of what I might do, but I know that I won't stick to it, only in the most general sense. And so then it's planning. Most of the things I worry about is, do we have a high enough ladder? That's always my worry. Will somebody be able to hold my ladder? Or does somebody else like to go up if it's really high? It's kind of funny. I don't worry about the rest. I don't allow myself to worry about the rest until I arrive there, because I don't want the anxiety. Because if I think too much about it, you get that fear of failure anxiety. Will it turn out? Will it look good? Will it be what I want? So basically, it's nuts and bolts sort of things, shipping and all that, and then showing up. And that's where, because when you look at an image of a space, or you look at a floor plan, it's not the feeling of being in a space. There's a feel that spaces have, that it's just not conveyed through photography.
Or a plan.
Yeah. It's really hard to figure that out. And so when I get in there, that's where I'm like, oh, okay. And then look at things like traffic flow too. I used to be a museum security guard many years ago. And one of the things I did, because, you just stand there all day, is to watch how people reacted to things and to spaces, and how they moved through spaces, and what caught their eye, and, all that sort of thing. And so I keep that kind of in mind. Sometimes I kind of mess with people, I'm sorry, but, to leave strings that might touch people on the head, or, sort of to almost kind of get into their space a little bit. But it's like early on, some of the installations I did, geez, I had a couple trip hazards early on, unintentionally, like with fishing line. And those are things I try to be mindful of. I don't want anybody taking a face plant on my piece or anything, or, hurting themselves. But, to look at that. So look at the flow in the space and then respond to that. And the hardest part is the first one. It's the hardest. It's like looking at the white canvas and trying to make that mark, the first mark.
And having you come to the museum and begin this process was very interesting to watch. I mean, Ashley did have the help of Ophelia Easton, who's our curatorial assistant, and Rob Kellenbeck, because though like you said, you did have an idea of what the space was going to be, and that's what enabled you to have the amount of pieces that you needed in advance, right? But what I witnessed is, like you said, is you felt the space when you entered the space. Like the true composition of the final installation really didn't come to fruition until you entered the space and began to design it. You had an idea. I remember you said, well, I have a kind of an idea of the way that I want it to flow. But did it vary from that, or did you stick to that original drawing or idea that you had?
It loosely stuck to it. I think I like the idea of it being more open. The installations can be very open, or it can be very closed. It can be very frenetic, or it can be more rational. And it sometimes depends on how I feel. And sometimes it's kind of the opposite of how I feel. And a lot of times like this, you have to work with the lights up there on the ceiling too. And it was, the other things to work around, nuts and bolts things, not going into floors. These are under a fair amount of tension. So, I can't just go yanking down your lighting tracks, and I try to be sympathetic to those things. Where can I tie off to that uses something already there, but it won't, get the fire marshal called on us, or, like I said, won't be a trip hazard, that sort of thing. It's kind of weird, but those limitations help shape the piece. And I like that. Those are the things that I usually ahead of time know and ask, know
Mhm.
to ask oftentimes now. There was one show I showed up to on the other side of the country. And when I showed up, the one thing I hadn't asked that I learned when I got there was, oh yeah, we can't put any screws or nails into the walls. And
That's going to be difficult.
that was the most difficult installation I've ever done. We ended up hiding nails under, you know how the floor comes down to the wall and then kind of insets and goes down.
Mhm.
We ended up being able to hide it. The whole thing got held with like 6 screws hidden in those areas. And it was 1,000 square feet.
So it takes a lot of engineering ingenuity when it
Yeah.
comes down to creating these works of art.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the words that you're using when you're describing the process of putting this in, when you were saying how you feel the space and you're also and there's amount of tension that comes into the execution of the piece. And I think what I'm getting at is like digging into the context of the piece, into what comes out of that for you as the maker, and then also how that relates to the viewer, especially when we're thinking about this idea of the history and the meaning of these kind of fiber art related works. So you were talking to me earlier and you were talking about um, the feeling that you get from old spaces that you've been in. And and I and do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that influences or whatever that does for
Yeah.
you in the
Well,
work?
with these, there is always that sense of nostalgia for me. And as I'm getting older, there's more of a sense of nostalgia in my life. I had a fairly consistent life through childhood. No major disruptions, no major traumas. It's a very, very normal, for all intents and purposes, upbringing, very happy. And, you know, and it's now that things have remained, there's a certain consistency in my life for a very long time. And things have changed more in the last, 15 years or so. Is my grandparents passed away, and you start to feel, my children were born, and you feel the transition in life, and it changes, and then everything going on the last couple of years, pandemic and all that. So I feel more of a sense of nostalgia and more looking back than to the future anymore. And I've always been an old soul, I guess you
Mhm.
say. It's like the other day I'm doing a puzzle, in my living room, and my husband's like, you're going to be great someday when you actually just totally retire, because you'll always have something to do. you know you've already got the puzzle going. I need to get out the word search or something. But
Mhm.
I've always been that kind of looking back, but always an old soul. And I like old things and old spaces. And that comes out, I think that's the autobiographical part of this work in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I'm critical of a lot of modern life. I like old furniture. I'm critical of flat pack kind of disposable furniture and things like that, and see a perceived value in older things. And so some of this kind of comes out of that. I don't know if I'm wandering. I wander. So
No, I don't think you're wondering. I mean, what I hear you getting to is this connection that happens in these installation parts, that uh, projects that you do, that runs deeper into how you connect personally with the work through your family history, right?
yeah.
And I in some ways, and I see that through the idea of the crochet, which you were saying was something that was taught to you by a family member, correct?
Yeah, my grandmother taught me how to crochet. As I always say, she taught me how to chain, and my aunt taught me how to turn. Um, but my grandmother was good at it. She was a seamstress, and she did crochet. I have her Afghans that she made. I wish I had some of the dresses that she had made that I wore when I was a kid that I was just like, oh, this is so dated, but they were very nice, all from scratch.
Crochet dresses?
No, sewn.
Oh,
Oh,
sewn dresses.
sewn. Yeah. Her mother and her, they were seamstresses. So,
Oh,
but
well,
she
that makes sense.
always
Yes.
did the handwork too, the crochet. And so she taught me. And it's always been something in my life. It was a good calmer for me. It's something that calms, a focus. I can I can really intently focus on things. I do a lot. And it depends on what it is. It's like, I dream by focusing on things. Like I like drafting architectural plans. How can I redo my house? And I'll sit there and I'll redo and I'll calculate square footage. And I'm like, wait, but if I want a bathroom, you have to have this much, space in front of the toilet, and you have to have this and your lawn, your clearances, because it's all about those like codes, which are the rules you have to work within, which relates kind of to the work, which works in this architectural space that has rules I have to work within other people's spaces. And a lot of people say, well, do I have any art in my own house of my own? Not really. Not in installations, because I have no rules in my own house. I could do anything I want. Sometimes it's the rules that I need. And I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe that's the Catholic schoolgirl thing, always living within the rules.
That's a
Maybe
very interesting perspective, especially when you're talking about rules. And then I see this title that very much relates to your installation, right? Keeping up appearances.
Yeah, because it gets into the idea of what we like. Okay, so like a home, that as I kind of talk about that, if you've got your home and within the home, there's public and private space. There's what the neighbors see. And that goes on beyond the physical home. Do you have an argument? Do you stand in the street and scream, or do you close the doors and have your argument? And for me, the way I've grown up is very much about you keep it within the home. You have a problem, you keep those problems within the family, and you keep up that appearance. And I've internalized that. I say, okay, if we're going to argue, let's go in the house. The neighbors can hear, even though, I'm sure they can't. They're pretty far away. But even with the way you decorate your home, what do you leave out for people to see? It's like I was on with students earlier and somebody says, oh, I like your setup behind you. And I'm like, it's not a setup. It's actually my home. It actually always looks like that. I didn't add stuff to make myself look different. It's what's in my home. And so it's that arrangement. So the arrangement translates into this installation. It's the arrangement of the things within that space. But it's, the color changes. It's a more aggressive color than what traditional doilies are. It should be white or ecru, and it's, they've come off.
And why the red? And why
because
the red
of the aggression. Yeah, the aggression, because, just like if you keep whatever within the home, a lot of the traumas within the home as well for people. These are not things you broadcast to the greater world. So it's kind of like what lies beneath in a way,
I can see that.
And by the way, I hate to say it, a lot of my titles also echo television and movies.
Well, yeah, and I like that because that is also kind of where you work, in that idea of the domestic space, right?
Yes, yes. And this is like, when I'm teaching college, I'm here too, in my living room, I'm working in my living room. But I was like, just thinking, I was like, ooh, what lies beneath? That would be a great title. That was a movie too,
Harrison and it was Ford kind of creepy, right?
Yes. That was a good one. Yeah, it's the woman who dies at the lake. Dies or something, she's off the pier. I know there's some scene in a boat at the end, but Keeping Up Appearances is actually after a British television show.
I love that intermingling of, like you said, the nostalgic aspects of your work as it relates to like history or personal history, and the concept of what these shapes are, which are doilies, like you said, and then that popular culture reference that's intertwined into it, that idea of this being something, a show that you were interested in watching, and and tell people how you create your pieces.
Yeah, and it's funny, anybody who does this kind of handwork, where it's that real intense handwork, everybody knows, what do you do with your mind while your hands are working? And I know a lot of people are like, I listen to educational podcasts. I hear that from a lot of people. And I'm like, I watch television, you know, I'm not going to pretend I'm watching, television about astrophysics or anything. I'm watching television. I'm watching shows. I mean, Below Deck, I love the show, hey, it's kind of trashy, but that's what I'm watching. Another one's Maine Cabin Masters. I love that because I spent a summer in Maine, and I really like it when people are building houses. I love house building shows. I like architecture. I like how things are made. And I've built quite a few things myself. I built my own deck and redid my own kitchen when I was younger and had more energy. And so understand, how things are made. Actually, a lot people they'll show up for doing stuff at my house and they'll expect me not to know these things. And I'm like, no, trust me, I know, I understand a lot about framing, plumbing, things like that. So I watch those kinds of shows because you've got to have something to do, because it is very repetitive work. It's soothing and repetitive, but it can also become mind numbing and repetitive.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Like the yellow wallpaper that one got to be a little like.
Should we move ahead to that one?
We don't have to just yet if
okay. Oh, but because we have those other ones. Well, here's another view. Yes.
Yeah. And it changes every time. And by the way, I don't tie in my ends. There's this perception with fiber arts about its pristineness. People throw that onto it. It's their own whatever that they put onto it. But I leave the ends. I don't tie them in. First off, I can't stand finishing. Where
explain what that means to those who don't do anything like that.
Okay, so like I knit the sweater, and I had to sew on the sleeves. And when you sew it on, then I've got the ends. Well, if I leave the ends long, it's not going to look good. So I've got to weave them in, sew them in with needle. But I hate that. Yeah. Sometimes I'll spend weeks, I'll knit a sweater and I never finish it because I don't do the finishing work, which is silly. I have projects like that. And I'm like, all I need to do is just sew in the ends. So I don't do it. But
is it like,
don't do it.
Well, in this piece, you have a lot of these like hanging threads, right? That similar in this picture, you see a little detail of like a little piece that's just not tucked in just right, which I find interesting as it combines with all the concepts related to this, and how
it breaks the perception. It breaks the perception of perfection. Right. And that is normally just attributed to this kind of work, because it is very, what I have to do when I'm doing these is, they always start in the center and they move out from the center. So it's done in rounds out from the center, and you're always repeating the pattern. So if you look at this one, where it looks like a flower on the right, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 holes. So the pattern will repeat 8 times. So, and I've gotten to the point where I can actually do that count in my head and carry on a conversation with somebody at the same time.
So you have these patterns memorized in your mind.
I memorize each row. And then it gets bad though when you're doing one like the 25-footer. That one was going to be the death of me. Because if I set it down, it was hard to pick it up. So I'll have to have a highlighter and then know where I am in the pattern. But the repeat on that was crazy. Some patterns I wouldn't do again because they were just such an annoyance. And some I like. And there are certain patterns I choose now for certain aesthetic appeal. And it's hard to describe, but I know them when I see them, like, oh, that would be a great pattern. That'll look wonderful. Usually,
go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, usually if the pattern's round on the last row, I don't like that as much as one that has a different look to it. Because I'm looking at the one on the left, there's a pinwheel second to the left, and that actually has a round outer row. And what I've done is pulled up pieces out of that, but I would prefer that it were, you know, a different way, come to a point naturally.
I see that.
It's a
Yeah.
weird aesthetic thing. It's sort of, I've just come up with that after doing this so many times.
Oh, I see what you mean. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like you work with the, so there's the yarn that makes the forms. And to do the installation, I'm only working with the forms. And I've developed sort of like an aesthetic rules that I stick to, choosing the patterns and how they're put up.
And when you choose your patterns, are you looking specifically at patterns from a certain period that you're drawn to? Are they family patterns, or are they patterns you've created yourself, or a mix?
Well, crochet is not very old. The majority of these kind of patterns are going to be post 1880s. So crochet, the oldest, can only really go back to about 1800-ish. And I'm working on that. I've been just telling my class earlier. I was like, I never published, but I've written like a 30-page research thing on the history of crochet. But
you should,
you know, because yeah, that would be a bestseller, and you know.
Yes, you never know. I'm serious.
But I've done a lot of research on it, and they're just the patterns, the way they were written, the materials, but they're not, crochet is not as old as knitting.
Right. Or embroidery.
And yeah, I mean, that's got such a longer history. And then there's murkiness about where crochet started and how it started and what it came from. And there's disputes on that. So the patterns, none of them are more than 140 years old. So they're not old.
Right.
Some of the good ones, they're usually commercial patterns. I do write my own, but I've gotten to the point where if I wrote a pattern and didn't write it down, I couldn't tell my pattern from a published pattern. That's not good. I should be able to tell that, but I'll look at it and like, was that one of mine? You know, I do write my own patterns. Like if I like a commission.
I know there's copyright, right, with some of those patterns that I've seen.
Some of them.
Some people do that, don't they?
Yes, they're technically all, but if a certain amount is altered, then it changes. And even people who've published these patterns, I know enough about the patterns to know that they're not original. There are few patterns that I've seen published that I haven't seen. I have an obscene collection of patterns, like obscene amount of patterns. I have books from the 1800s I've collected, and yeah, I see a lot of them published, and I'm like, that's not original. I know that. I know I have a really good visual recall,
right.
Almost semi-photographic memory, and I'll remember, oh wait, and I can go back and find the patterns. So usually I alter them because I'll be like, oh, I don't like this, so I'm going to add this or subtract that. But when I do commission work, I do actually write my own patterns. So yeah, just in case.
A little bit about what you were saying, what I was interested in, because you said how much you collect these different patterns. How much of your work has that element of collecting, repurposing, reusing, you know, changing direction? Tell me a little bit about what you do with that.
A lot of this is collecting. I am a collector. When I studied art history, that's what I studied, history of museums and collecting. That's what I found interesting, not the art, where it was housed, the spaces, and the process of collecting. I used to teach that ways back. I would teach my classes about the history of museums and the spaces and you know, reasons why people collect. And then I mean, that also came from the fact I was pretty much a hoarder, so I'm reformed mostly. The problem, what do they say, that a hoarder is just an indiscriminate collector or something like that?
Yeah, really.
I do try to discriminate because there's only so much, but people give me old doilies. I have an obscene collection of those as well. And I can do what's called pattern drafting. So I can look at the doily, I can write the pattern from it. So wow. I can reverse engineer it. And I frequently do that if I really like a pattern, you know. So yeah, there's a lot about collecting.
And
Um,
what about the pieces themselves? Do they always stay the way they do? Do you ever reuse the material or?
all the time. Yeah, some of this stuff is some of these, like my old friends in there, I call them, they're like, you know, the nostalgia. And you know, they're like over 10 years old, 10, 12 years old. And I'll remember, and the crazy part too is the yarn that I was using, the company went out of business. So there was a really, this is all cotton. The tradition of doilies is to use cotton. Because you block it and it holds its shape. Even without starching, the cotton will hold its shape. It has a memory. You wash it too much, it loses the memory, and that's when you have to get into like starching. But the United States had a great history of the production. I mean, obviously, you know, but like spinning in mills, and it's gone now. It was North Carolina. A lot of it was in North Carolina. And I like things that tie into other things. I wrote my thesis in art history about Black Mountain College in North Carolina. And so the company I was using was out of North Carolina. It was American grown and American manufactured. They're gone. So I see that, and I see the dye lot that doesn't match the new dye lots. So I can tell you by dye lot which yarn it is and when it went out of business, because they discontinue yarn frequently. Now a lot of this stuff, it can be grown. And by the way, California is a huge cotton growing state now. And then there's issues about the sustainability of it, but they're using, been doing research on this because there's a lot that's being used here in California that is low water.
Okay.
And so to address that, there are many different varieties out there. It's a regulated industry in California, but it's still grown here, but now it's spun in Canada. So the mills that spun went out of business, which is unfortunate, which is sort of part of all of that decline of American manufacturing, which is sad. And like I said, there was a dye lot, and not a dye lot, but there was a specific color I really liked, and the company discontinued, went out of business. So I found another, but it's a shade different. And then I went up to a better cotton because it was shedding too much. I was breathing too much. And that's a slightly different color. And so I can trace the history of the work and this stuff. But then there's also a mortality to this. It will not last forever. It is cotton. And it has a lifespan as much as I have a lifespan. That when I stop arranging this, that's the end. And so there's an acknowledgement of mortality as well. Whereas a lot of art doesn't have that, you know, oh, I'm going to do my painting and we'll be looking at it, you know, 500 years on because it's done in oil and it's worked out a certain way or that sort of thing.
So there's a documentation through the photograph in one sense, and then it's over.
Yeah.
And it takes on a new permutation in a new space, and then until it doesn't.
There's a sense of loss too, where, you know, when I do these, I go in, it's done quickly usually because, you know, it's got to be done quickly. And, you know, I work frenetically and then it's over and I have little time to live with it, to spend with it. I leave it for other people to live with. You've lived with it a lot, you know.
We have, and we love it.
But I mean, it's you know, I spend very small amount of time with it and then I'm gone. And then it comes, you know, gets shipped back. And so it's a weird thing. Sometimes I'll just sit quietly for a half hour and that's the time I've spent, you know. So it's a different experience. And it's a different experience to make somebody else live with something you've made. I remember working in a museum. It was the Venturi, Robert Venturi building. We had to work and it wasn't very functional. But it was beautiful. But it's like, you know, every last thing I'm just sitting there like cussing it, like, oh, why did he make the desk this way? You know, but it's very beautiful. So the idea of designing a space that somebody lives in, and that's kind of freaking out lately because I'm designing a redo of my space and I feel like, man, if I mess this up, I'm the one stuck living with it. I can't blame it on anyone else.
You bring up a good point, I think, in terms of experience. That's something that happens a lot with your piece as a result of being this installation, is the quality, not the quality, the aspect of experience that goes along with it as a viewer, because you're just not simply looking at it. you're physically moving through a space. And in this particular installation, you are encapsulated by Ashley's pieces. As you walk through this long corridor, this long gallery space, you are, the space changes completely as you move through. If you were, accustomed to walking in this gallery space before as a member or a patron or a community member, they've all noticed this difference. There's an experiencing awe, wonder, beauty, and sometimes the longer that they've been sitting in it and looking at it, they start to feel discomfort.
I hope so. I
They
hope so,
start to
just a
feel
little
a
way.
little bit of like
Just a
intensity
little.
of
Yeah.
this overhanging installation that almost wants to unravel them in some way, and that memory that you're talking about is fairly significant. The memory of the piece, I really like the way that you described that. It's almost like a living object in some way. It has different permutations, like a skin in some way that just kind of morphs depending on where it's going to be at, and that takes your story with it, but absorbs the stories that it's in.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fast.
It's a back and forth. There's a back and forth. It speaks to the space and the space speaks to it.
I'm going to look at this so that people can see, tell a little bit about how your piece in different.
Okay. Well, the one on the left is the walk comb. That was the biggest one I had done to that point, which is still, I think it's still the biggest in terms of height, but maybe not square footage. But that was one of there's moments. There's always moments within these, my favorite moments, because there's the whole, and then there's as you go through it and what you experience. That was a moment that I really liked in there because that was the second floor balcony and you could look out through it and look down. And
This
I really enjoyed
it. Talking about.
Yeah, that was up in is it the Wacom? It's Washington, Bellingham, not Bellevue, Bellingham, but the one further up to the north. And I did that one when my daughter was, I think she was around. She's like an infant or something. I did some big ones when she was a baby, and I look back now, I'm like, whoa, that was kind of crazy.
Like, there a lot of feeling.
And then in the middle, that was in San Diego. And that was a lot of fun because, there's the idea of doing things in a gallery, but then there's using unusual spaces. And I like the idea. I was given a choice. What do you want to do? I said, I want the staircase, not the wall, the staircase, because to make the work respond to this very utilitarian piece of architecture that usually you try to hide. And that's what I really liked about that one. And that's my husband and my child walking up there, my daughter. So, and I have those shots a lot of times, them in the environment that I usually don't show. Those are for me, but sometimes I remember where I was by the age of them and that sort of thing. The one on the right, I really enjoyed that one. I wanted to go install that. It would have been cheaper for me to fly to Italy to install it than ship it. But what I had to do with that one is I had to create it here on the ground, tied it all together, and then gave the instructions. And so that was interesting to play with this idea that somebody else would do the decoration. Because sometimes I think about it, it's like decorating the space,
Why did that happen?
Pardon?
Why did that happen?
I don't know exactly how it happened, but well, let me go back on that. I ended up getting shingles. I don't know how I got it, but I somehow must have related to my son. It was right around the time he got his chickenpox shot, and I got shingles bad. And I'm too young, so everyone's like, it's not. And I'm like, it sure looks like chickenpox, So
was this the first time you had to let it be and let somebody else do it based on your instruction? How hard was that?
Agony, absolute agony. I'm a control freak. It was agony. But what happened is because I kept saying this is not right. What is this? And then it got infected. It was all this crazy. So it went untreated, which if you ever end up with that, it can cause nerve damage. And so I, even to this day, If I don't get enough sleep, my neck will start to burn up into my head. Like, so it came back. I had it a couple times. And the show was coming up. I desperately wanted to go there. And it was in a church, a disused cathedral, or I don't know what they call it, a decommissioned cathedral. But I'd always wanted to do it in a religious space, because there's already this, one of my favorite things to teach about had been the cathedrals, and talking about all the parts of a cathedral and what they're used for, and the apses and all that. I mean, I used to just beat my students with that, like memorize all the parts of the cathedrals. And I love that it's already a reverential space, but this one's decommissioned. So yeah, I up until it had to be mailed, I was still trying to decide, but I just couldn't physically undergo the stress of making the flight from California to Italy and then going through the installation. It was horrible. But it's a good lesson, because, you know, I have a physical body and I have limitations. And as I'm getting older, and I've looked at a lot of artists, installation artists, who talk about this. I've taught about, I was teaching art and human development, and we talked about that, you know, aging as that process. And, you know, artists who do installation or performance, you know, when you are part of that material, how do you deal with that aging? And so I'm working with that, and the work will evolve with that. And I'm you know, embracing that, you know, and so
you're rewriting your rules.
Yeah, I am, but it was a really fun experience, to see it. And, it was really, I have other shots where it's further out, because it was around the perimeter of a larger show, and it just pops, you know. And it's funny, because the red itself is not that vibrant, but when it gets lit, it has a glow, and it takes over fast.
Beautiful.
And one time I did a whole room, Nevada Museum of Art. I did this small triangular room, and I did it all the way around. It was like 360, and I'd been in this small room, red everywhere. And my husband, like, at some point, he pulled me out and he's like, "You need to take a break now." And it had started affecting me, the color and the saturation. It was a weird visceral reaction to the intense color
and being surrounded.
Yeah.
And you yourself doing the work, so that's even more intense.
And it goes to show that we can, and there are studies about color and color interactions and color effects on people. I always think about the one where they stuck prisoners in pink, trying to calm them down.
Oh, geez.
I don't know. I think it was a study somewhere or something I read about. I note things about color. I'll write things down about color, but I was like, what? But color associations too, what we associate with color, and it changes, there's cultural changes. But yeah, these ones, I love these images.
Well, as I'm looking at you here in my screen, for example, I see you layered in front of this piece in the cathedral. And behind you, I see this skull, you know, this kind of idea of the memento mori.
Yeah.
But
so you saw I'm in a pew, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I found a pew. It fit right here. It was like it was meant to be. I know, it's awful, isn't it? This sort of like I lecture, I'm like in my pew here. I don't know.
No, I love it. And
I just wanted one.
I guess what I'm saying is I can see how much really in these contemporary works of art that you're creating, how much history is important to you and the work that you're doing, because you were mentioning to me earlier that this is not where you had seen yourself as an artist when you started, and even in these pieces didn't begin the way that we see them today. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, back when I was an undergrad many years ago, you know, back in the 90s when I was an undergrad, I'm like, oh my God, it was a different century. But I was a painter, so figurative painter, and Caravagesque, you know, lots of, it was saturated color, but a lot of moody, dark, and, you know, tenebrism going on in the works. And I, you know, because to me, that's like, when I went into that was the legit way to make art. You know, you're a painter. There's this tradition and a respect, and there's an edginess too, but there's a long history there. and trying to get into that, I could never really, I mean, I found a niche that I liked. I think I was okay at it. And, you know, I look back at some of my undergrad works and think, yeah, it was pretty good, you know, but, you know, it didn't meet a need for me, something deeper, a deeper meaning. There got to be a point of like, what am I painting? Why am I just painting people? You know, is it about who they are, or does it need to be more? And it needed to be more to keep it interesting, to keep the work evolving. And also my conception of art have changed. Instead of like one piece and I'm done and I move on, this is a series, like a life that evolves. And, you know, I can keep pushing this and pushing this and pushing this, and trying it in different ways. It's interesting, but it's a slower moving process because I only do so many a year. You know, it's not like I could sit down with a painting and I could probably bang out one every day and make this huge arc. For me, the arc, you know, I'm going on 10 years of the arc now. And so to slow down time by making this larger arc, it's an interesting concept, but it's something I've found that can sustain me through my life. And, you know, I don't, again, the problem I have though is, you know, physically, my physical self, how that translates and at what point I would have to stop. I mean, it's almost like when I know I'm doing a big installation too, you know, a lot of days I sit on my butt, and, you know, I crochet, that's what I do. And if I know I have a big show, I have to start getting in shape before the show because the ladder work is exhausting. You know, up and down, up and down, up and down kind of stuff. It takes a certain amount of physical strength to do. But, you know, I look at somebody, it reminds me of some of the lecture I saw with, was it Yinka Shonobare, where he talks about that. It was something I used to show to my class, and he would talk about the idea of the art and his limitations and working around that. And it was really inspiring for me to hear an artist talk about that, you know. So to think about that as part of the evolution. Yeah. And
the mental
all of us
reality.
has it. Yeah. Oh yeah. But the physical reality, and you know, Southern California, nobody wants to acknowledge that physical reality. You know, it's, you know, the land of, yeah, the land of perpetual 20 and 30. But you know, it is a reality. It is. And with children too, there were you know, that was a wake-up call as well, on my physical body, and took a lot of time recovering from that, and it has caused me limitations. But again, all the limitations become part of the inspiration and part of the challenge, and the challenge is a good thing because that's what keeps it fresh for me. You know, how can I work around, how can I evolve this? So like I said, long arc, which is cool.
I think that's a good transition into this when we're talking about
yeah.
the limitations.
Long.
Yes, and
yeah, long.
you know, the limitations of you know, well, not limitations, but the situations that we have to confront in our life through history, and how this kind of piece came to be, and your process and everything.
Yeah. This one's Yellow Wallpaper. So it's in a room, which is incredibly difficult to photograph. It's really an experiential piece. You have to be in that room to really feel it.
This is here at the museum, by the way. Yeah, sorry. This is here at the museum.
But it's just this intense yellow glow in there. And the Yellow Wallpaper is a short story, and it's about a woman. And this is kind of my COVID piece, right? I'm sure we're all going to have like those COVID pieces, but this is that piece that I've been considering for a long time of wanting to do and not found that connection yet. And then when COVID came on, this was a time to do the piece and to start the series. I thought we'd be out of things by now. I thought the series had ended, but alas, we are not. So at least not here in California. But you know, the idea of that short story is that this woman suffers a nervous breakdown, and as a cure, she's sent to a country home where she'll be home all the time, the domestic cure. And I feel like it's like my own domestic cure. I used to think I'd love to be home all the time. Now I'm home all the time. And I think we always want what we don't have, probably. You know, I was traveling a lot, you know, every 3 months or so. And sometimes that feeling of just coming back and settling into my space. But now being in it all the time, it's sort of this almost like it becomes like a mania, and that's what the yellow is for. And it transitions and there's pieces missing. It kind of reminds me too, oddly enough, of this wallpaper in my sister's room when I was a kid. It was like 1960s, but it was like, I don't remember if it was flocked or not, but it was yellow and it had these repeating kind of fiery
yes.
shapes.
Mhm.
And sometimes I like going on things like eBay and trying to rebuy stuff that I experienced when I was younger, how I remember it. But these are all do you have the close-up of what they are, of the pineapples?
Yes.
Because it's hard to read it. So each one is individual, and I wish I'd counted. I didn't count how many are in there, but it was a lot. And so they're all pineapple. It's a pineapple is the name for that pattern. It's actually more of a rounded kind of a teardrop shape, but when it gets pulled out, it gets triangular. And so, you know, there's, what does a pineapple mean? Welcome, you know, and pineapples used to be like, you know, they were super expensive because, you know, they're tropical and you have to import them and all that. But that's what that shape is. And it's done out of nylon, which is unusual for me. It's very heavy, but also the idea of that kind of artificial material. So the material, as well as the color, as well as the pattern, it all speaks together. And that's how I, you know, build pieces in series, by looking at all of those things. And then this one cuts corners, changes the shape too.
You were talking about that artificial aspect and talk about how that contrasts with the other piece that you have, because the materials are different.
Yeah. Normally I stuck with the cotton because that's very traditional for doilies inside. And I wanted to kind of keep that historical knot. And it is natural and it will degrade, it will disintegrate because it is cotton. It sheds. I mean, I don't know if you guys have gotten the red dust bunnies in there yet, but they usually come along with the piece, you know. I'm using a better cotton so it doesn't shed as much, but it's always that natural element, you know. And then you get into this, the difference is that you get this vibrancy of color, and there's a different feel, even though the other one's mercerized cotton, so it's got a slight sheen to it. This nylon, it has a shinier quality to it. It's just a different, I don't know, different visceral feel to me. And like I said, the weight is just beyond. It's super, super heavy. The length, it should last longer inside, but I like that artificialness.
I love the way that you combine that artificiality with the meaning of your work, and that weightiness is much like the piece itself, right? The other one seems like it has a ephemeral possibility to it. This one, like the yellow room, is this weight, right? Like you were experiencing creating it during COVID, this idea that it'll never end and it'll be so heavy on your back.
Yeah, it's oppressive.
This color, yeah.
The other one is, it dances more through the space, and it has open places to look up through to let the viewer have some open, but this one has a more oppressive feel to me. It's almost more, I don't know, maybe it's a mindset thing. Sometimes they reflect my mindset at the time. And all of these, I in order to get this done on time, you know, I had to set a certain amount per day that I had to do every single day. So, you know, it was putting myself through the paces to do it. And it's certain days, you know, I can only do so much with my arms and my hands. And, you know, you can feel it at the end of the day. So, you know, and some days you're just like, I don't want to do another one today. I just want to do anything else but literally sit down and do that work. Yeah, you know, doing it with a 3-year-old screaming in the background, doing it, you know, with everything going on, and constantly, you know, I have to put it down and do things, come back, put it down, come back. It's like this constant, it's such a part of my life. It's interwoven into it.
I think that leads into what I was telling you yesterday, Ashley, about how the third graders who come in to view the artwork look at the work. And this particular one, we had those readings about them observing it and thinking about them as either sunsets or sunrises, right? So that ties in exactly to what you were saying. It was this inability to decide if the day was starting or if the day was ending, and it was just perpetual. It just, it's an idea of infinity. It doesn't end. It's starting and ending all at the same time. And the kids got that from the colors and that kind of ombre gradation that you're creating the work too.
Yeah, it's this, you know, how do we mark time? How is time moving? You know, it's I've lost sense of time. I have a profound loss of sense of time in the last 2 years. And I hear that from everybody. And it's like, it really is, you know, I'm not marking my time with the same things I was marking it with before, those punctuations, celebrations. And I realized just how much that must be what causes the loss of sense of time for me, you know. Like even the seasons. I mean, of course, I'm in California, it's like eternal summer here. So there's already the loss of time. And because there's, you know, I mean, I was sitting there out today looking at my garden and thinking about wisteria, because I have a large wisteria and I did it up over a thing. And when it blooms, it hangs down. I've worked on this wisteria for years. It takes a long time to get it to do, you know, I'm probably 10 years in on this project. But the intensity of the purple is beautiful, but this will be watch my third bloom on it when it comes out in the next couple months. I was thinking about that. I was thinking that might be a nice piece, you know, because it's finally to that point where it's got the intensity of that bloom that hangs down.
So you're creating new markers for time.
Yeah. So I was thinking this will be, I've seen 2 blooms on that, because right in around March, when we first went into lockdown here, it bloomed right after that. And then I worked with it more. And then I remember it blooming last year. And then this will be a 3rd year. So it should be blooming again soon. It's quite beautiful though. It's up on a big frame. It's up on a
just
huge
like
frame.
every beautiful flower in San Diego that we're all very envious of and jealous. As today, our curatorial assistant brought in her geranium plant to stick it in the high window to see if it could have an opportunity to have a bloom this year.
Oh no! Oh no!
And
That's it. I'm
they're
trying
like
to get.
everywhere in San Diego. They're just like all over the place.
Yeah,
it's like,
but it is been cold.
Here.
I'm nursing my avocado through the cold winter here. So, you know, it's just enough frost to get the avocado. And I'm looking up at it and I've got like Christmas lights on it. I've got a spotlight to keep it warm at night, but I got to go up and look at it. I don't think it's looking happy.
They are sensitive.
I have a lot of those plants, the plumeria and, you know, stuff where I have to kind of finesse it a little more and kind of baby it through the winter. Not too much. Then there's this one. So here's a different iteration of the yellow wallpaper. So one at your museum is the second. And so there was one outside in a natural environment and then inside, and then this one's outside. Yeah, okay. There's the first one, which is it'll be 2 years old coming up in the fall. And so the posts were there and I was responding to the posts that were already there. That thing was tall. That was a tough one. That's up at Franconia and up in Minnesota. And yeah, and it's been through some crazy weather. You know, that's always the hard thing for me, is perceiving weather outside of my own. It's like I did some show one time where like, yeah, you want to come to New York? When do you want to come? I'm like, how about January? You know? So,
no.
Yeah, I was like, I told my husband, like, we can see Niagara Falls. So we went to Niagara Falls in the first week of January, and it was very cold. It was the coldest I think I've ever been in my life. And I was like, what was I thinking? So yeah, this one I did, it was right as the fall was turning to winter. And like the last day out, there was this massive like storm came through. It was just pelting hail. And I was like, oh my. So it's holding up. It's pretty cool, you know, because you just never know. I mean, I put stuff out in the sun and I watch how long it takes to fade. But this kind of intense weather pummeling and pelting it is something that's almost, it's unpredictable, you know.
And what was the reception?
A lot of good
Piece,
feedback
yeah.
from it. It's unexpected because you can see it from the road, but then when you're in the sculpture park, it's kind of tucked around and back. There was sort of like, well, you could do it out in this area or maybe in this other area that's kind of swampy. And I'll be really honest, I don't do well with mosquitoes. And so people say, you want to do anything in a mosquito area? I'm like, you know, I ended up in the hospital from a mosquito. I'm not so good with them. They love me and I react very poorly. So I was like, I think I'd rather be out here in the less mosquito-y, ticky area. But I also thought it would be fun to weave it into something natural. So for the one that was before this, then I wanted to create a room because it's about a room. So you can go in there and you're surrounded. It's deceptive. It's over 20 feet tall. I think it's 20 feet tall. I know it's 16 feet wide at the bottom. And all the posts are actually off kilter. Not one is plumb level or anything. Even the doorway, it's a kind of a, I hate to say it, the doorway, I was kind of going, remember in Beetlejuice at the end with the doorway? The fireplace becomes the doorway. It's kind of, I've always loved that. So we didn't do it as extreme, but I kind of was like, yeah, I want the doorway to be kind of funky. Again, it's always movie references. Maybe it's a California thing, right? You know, I don't know. Growing up in the land of Disneyland.
Yes.
You know? I met people
Popular
from Florida, grew up in Florida.
is
yeah.
dominating.
A lot of people, it's like, it's just kind of how it is. I think through movies, I don't know, good or bad, but I always like that visually. And so, you know, this one, yeah, that was an interesting install. It was tough. It was, you know, to get it all in there, to get it to do what I wanted it to do, and then to have to do calculations because nothing was square. Would have been easier if it had been square, but I thought it would have been more boring to me. You know, I like this idea of sometimes you have to make things out of plumb to look plumb. It's a weird thing. My front gate is that way. It's plumb, but it always looks out of plumb. I know this because my father's put a level to it multiple times. Because he insists it must be out of plumb. I'm like, it's totally plumb. We built it. I'm like, it's plumb. And we always check and he's like, it just looks plumb. I mean, something else is off to make it look like it's out of plumb, some other line. And so again, it's how lines affect other lines and perception. So much about what we think is not what things really are visually, you know.
And
I
of
love
course
that
ties in perfectly with this yellow wallpaper. I love the way it's transformed from that initial piece in Franconia to being this wall outdoors, and then coming here and being within the interior space and a little bit more in terms of the inside, and then combining that in this work in a way, you know.
Up at Paris Gibson, it's sort of, there's almost like a literalness to it that I like too. Like it's literally the wallpaper, it's kind of not because it's coming off. But I like that. I like where something is. It's like I've done this piece. I think one of the other ones coming up is the Arsenic Green, where it's an Afghan. And I just love that. It's like, it is an Afghan. You could theoretically use it as one, you know. I had a piece like that years ago that was a blanket. It was 2 blankets. You could walk through them. And I joke with people at the time and say, you know, either I made a piece of art or I made a blanket. Either way, I've been successful, you know?
That's right.
I couldn't go wrong.
Yeah. What is your intention with this work, right?
Yeah. I mean, hey, I can't fail, right? You know, you're like, that's not art. Okay, good. It's a blanket. Totally great blanket. But actually the piece ended up being neither, you know, so it wasn't quite a blanket, but then it also was craft, which is technically, you know, I mean, it's on that verge as well. This one's Queen Anne's lace. And this is the most, I guess, directly referential to doily that I've ever done in terms of the color, the white. And this was done at Edith Wharton's house. It's called The Mount, and it's up in the Berkshires. And you walk through it. yeah, what a beautiful area too, which I do that Southern California thing. It's so green here, everywhere I
Mhm.
go. I'm always amazed by how green things are in the summer, because to me, summer's brown and winter's green. And so is this green and forest, and you could walk through, there was a path. And so you walk through the whole installation, and there were, I don't know, 15, 20, something like that, all throughout there. And so they all look different. It was a nightmare to photograph because you couldn't get them all in one shot. You could only sort of get hints of them in there. So frustrating, but it was a lot of fun. And this was my daughter walking through, which I thought was a lot of fun. She still remembers that installation.
Mhm.
She remembers a lot of them, actually, even when she was really young. And so she'll talk about, she thinks art is a lot of string and tying things. So
Obvious.
I don't discourage her at all,
Well,
so
I love the way that when you're showing all of this, for example, for the people who have come to see the exhibit here at the museum, they have a potentially a particular idea of where the work should be located, and now through the discussion, they can see like the work doesn't necessarily need to be located within a particular space. It changes, it means something new. It creates a new space, a new dynamic, depending on where it is, based on the architecture, the grounds, the historical context of the
yeah,
space, right? I
yeah.
love the
This one
layers
was
of
fun
meaning,
because
you
the
know?
Wharton, yeah, the Edith
Yeah.
Wharton, I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to do a piece there, man. We studied her like crazy in high school,
Mhm.
like my senior year, we had to I don't know how many books we, and I just always remembered that. And I was like, oh, that would be really fun. Cause I like it when something reaches back that I can pull out of my own life that relates. I like tangents, things that
Right.
relate, tangentially, that sort of come and meet. And I find that very interesting, those weird little moments like that. I cherish them in a very strange way. It's kind of
And in
dorky, but I
and
like
well, what you're saying in many ways references your work in a web-like fashion. You know what I
it. Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
In that idea of these tangents just reaching out and coming together or spreading out depending on what you're doing. And that of course is just an extension of your work. But if you wanted to extend it that far, you could say those things.
Yeah. Yeah. It always makes it more meaningful, and that was, what was that? That was what, Highfield Hall. That was an amazing tree. It really was. The tree is just, that was a no filter shot. Just a straight shot with that. And I just love the tree. I was in love with the tree, you know,
Mhm,
it's has it had a personality in the bark.
mhm.
But your Queen's Anne lace, it's a weed. But it's a flower. So I guess that's a matter of perspective. And it's arranging installation, so it ranges over quite a bit. It kind of takes over, it spreads over,
Mhm,
over place, like the lace does.
mhm.
It was also Queen Anne building, which is pretty cool. She's a really neat style of architecture. I like architecture, so but yeah, that one was fun though. I just, like I said, I'm in love with that tree in that shot.
So once again, playing with the words, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
meanings and the histories and the multiplicity.
Yeah. There's a poem too, Queen
Mhm.
Anne's Lace. And
Oh,
I can't remember it, but there is a poem too. So kind of all tying in together. Yeah. And that one. I enjoy this piece because it's gone. It's totally gone. It burned up. This is the one that was down in when I did that. I was an instructor at Aramont for a session, and came in and taught filet crochet, which is what that style is. It's a square based system. You can create imagery. So I created a small little little piece of kind of lace, and I put it in the instructor's quarters. I put it around a pot. I didn't tell anybody was there. I knew I was coming back in a year. And unfortunately, when I went back, the there'd been a big fire and the building had burnt down. It was a huge forest fire. And kind of why that meant something to me is when I was living up in the mountains in Southern California, I went through 2 forest fire evacuations. And it's something that I don't talk about in depth because it's still, I still find it very traumatic, the whole experience of going through that and literally packing up and trying to get off the mountain. And then, you know, like I remember one of my memories is watching, I mean, it was crazy. It was 03 and 07, you know, everything was on fire in Southern California. And I've always been afraid of fire. It's always been my greatest fear as a child. And then to go through 2 of those, I was like, wouldn't you know it? But it just remember sitting there and watching it. Must have been, I think it was 20 miles that first day that it burned, and watching the entire front of the mountain I lived on, it's just all on fire. So when it went through this area, you know, I knew exactly how those people felt in those areas, you know, kind of what it's like in the aftermath of that. My home made it through, my town generally made it through because it was a very old town, and they staged right there, you know, the fire truck staged right in my neighborhood. So, but, you know, a lot of people lost their homes, and afterwards, the first thing you ask somebody is, how is your home? You know, did it make it through? How did you do? And I knew people in San Diego had lost their homes because there were fires in San Diego, LA, and up in San Bernardino. So that was that personal connection. And then I never told anyone the release was there. I never photographed it, and then it burnt. So I was like, oh, okay. So it was interesting to think of that, again, that real mortality of a piece. And, you know, that's how it goes. It's like, I just, you know, heard from an artist whose entire house had burnt down somewhere and all her work had gone with her. You know, all her work had burnt. And I think, wow, that's, you know, so that was what that piece is, but it does show the process as well when I was working in the little thread, which right now I'd need some massive magnifying glasses to do.
It's impressive to see that you work that small as well.
Yeah.
In comparison to what you see here today.
The muscle memory is different too. I'll go back and forth to keep my hands, because if I work too much with big, my hands, you have to hold it. There's a certain relaxation you have to have with your hands. And I'll find myself going to reach for things and not grabbing tightly enough. So I'll go down to something like this, which is tighter and it's different muscle, and it helps keep my hands limber. I also go back and forth from crochet to knitting because of that. It's a different hand movement. I've escaped carpal tunnel so far.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so. I know the warning of when to stop and to switch back and forth, because I crochet or knit every day. But I know to switch and stuff, and I'm keep mindful of it. I've never hired out for any of my handwork. That is still something that many artists do, but I'm not there yet. You know, because people say, well, you could do more, but this is about my lived life too, and that limitation of life. So, you know, if I can't do it, then I can't do it.
Well, I think that's a good way to transition into this next.
Well,
two different pieces that kind of combine both of those ideas of like the immediacy of life, the potential for death, you know, and this kind of stressful qualities of, you know, the life and then the work, right?
Yeah, they're both part of the general arsenic green series, but one being more discrete piece and the other being an installation. The one on the left, that's my Afghan piece. You know, it's laser cut, laser etched plexi in there, or acrylic in the centers, and just the regular old granny square, which is so, you know, oh, it's so maligned. Granny squares, but they're great, you know, and
it is pretty.
It is. You know, but it had its real 1970s moment, but, you know, and I see it pop up now and then, but I love the idea too, that it is another one of those things that, because the mathematics of it, it can go on to infinity. You just square after it just grows, it can grow, and you just always grow. And that's with the pinwheel design on the right. That's the last one I just installed 2 weeks ago. and I've always wanted to do it and finally got a chance to do it. They are pinwheel. I did that. That's my design, one of my patterns, and it's a repeatable pattern. It just can go on into infinity. The way that it's written, so mathematically the increases every row. I mean, it can. The biggest one I have is like 10 feet. I could keep going. It just depends on, it's kind of crazy because you have
Are
to
one
count.
of those 10 feet? Or how large is
The biggest one is 6 feet.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
So
the scale is a
here?
weird. The right one. I'm pointing at the screen like you can see my screen.
Right, this one right here.
Yeah, that one. So it's about
that
6
one is
feet.
6 feet. Wow. So this is immense.
Well, it's not enormous, but it's larger than you would expect. It doesn't look so. I realized a lot of times when I photograph, scale doesn't come across. But they're flat to the wall. That's the difference too. There's no depth to it. It is flat to the wall, and it's 2 different shades of green, which people say, isn't that black? No, it's actually a darker green and a lighter green. So the arsenic green is a reference to that Victorian green. It was a green color, a synthetic dye, but it was arsenic based. And so people were dyeing clothing and wallpaper and all sorts of things with it, and it would outgas, and it made people horribly sick. And so, the reason for it was the beautifying of your space, of your domestic space, of the dresses that the women wore, but it was deadly. And so I find that an interesting contradiction there, that death by vanity in a way, trying to impress others, to show off your beautiful things, but it's killing you, so that's what the arsenic green is, why I've called it that. And those are images of households on the left that would be mostly of women and children, or women showing off their homes, posed on the couch and that sort of thing. So, and then the picture of the girl playing the piano. I played the piano as a child. I still play the piano poorly, but I play the piano. My daughter plays piano. It's one of these things. It's an interesting. Piano keeps me humble because I know that I will never be a concert pianist. I love playing. I enjoy music greatly. And when it comes to piano, I don't have that something that you would need to go to the next level of piano, to even be to improvise. It's weird. It's an interesting thing. And I think I like to do that, play it because of that. I struggle with it.
Make you feel like it keeps you humble?
Yeah. Because I'm awful at, I say I'm awful. I can play songs, but I was in piano class before COVID. That's one of the things I gave up with COVID. Our teacher retired. It was unfortunate, but every week I would go play piano in a class. And I'd been doing that for a couple of years. I hadn't touched piano in years. Somebody I know had a free piano. If you can move it, you can have it. It's right. To hire a piano mover. So I got a piano mover. I've got this antique piano, but like this other guy in the class, he could improvise, and you hear him play and you're just like, I will never. And I like that. I like that I will never. But, and I don't play for other people. I play usually for myself. But I miss my class. I need to get back into it. My daughter just started piano, so I do hear it, around the house and such.
So that's kind of like a little bit in another window into who you are and your work. As you said, it's like autobiographical. So in some way it is like a portrait of who you are, ironically, as a painter, right?
Yeah.
But not a literal portrait of you, but rather than kind of just descriptive of the things that you've experienced in an indirect way.
Yeah.
And so that keeping you humble and finding beauty in the imperfection, right? I like this.
I enjoy that I can't play that well. Like I say, I play better than I let on, but never, it's not somebody who's got it. You know what I mean? Like when you see somebody who's got it and, and you're just like, oh, that's what I'm missing, Yeah. And I've done piano most of my life, and like, last year I got into a musical thing, and I love buying secondhand instruments. I have a huge collection of instruments I can't play, or I play poorly. I have, a squeeze box, violin. I took violin for 6 months. I was terrible at that. The piano, dulcimer, flutes. I mean, all kinds of weird stuff, I had a guitar, but somebody broke in my house and stole that. So that's good on them, though. It needed fixing, somebody to play it. But yeah, the next thing I'm going to do is I want to play pirate shanties. So I've got the concertina. I had a dream the other night. I was playing the concertina. It's time to pick it up and really give it a go, into the kalimba a lot.
Yeah.
So I like music and I like playing different things, but yeah, terrible at it.
Again,
but I like musical instruments.
Again, the collecting, right?
Yes.
The
And when to know to stop.
Instruments and sounds. No.
Yeah.
Do you think you would ever combine your installation work with sound?
I have once. I did once. It was a show only. It was for my thesis show. And it was only seen by less than 10 people. It was pink. The whole ceiling was pink doilies and furniture. It was a room and there was music and it was piano music. So.
Interesting. And that was definitely, to me, I'm not sure, you tell me if I'm wrong, that sounds like quite an autobiographical situation going on right there. Yeah.
Yeah, my house was pink when I was a kid. All pink. It's all, is it still pink? Yeah, it's still pink. It was yellow when I was a kid. Now it's pink. It's funny, you walk in there, it's like when somebody has a beard and then they shave it and you don't notice. When you're in there all the time and you're like, what color is it? Like I'm at my parents' home all the time. But yeah, it's pink. It's all pink. It's a lot of pink. It's tasteful. It's very nice. It's pink.
Right. It's well-matched pinks.
It is. And I'm fond of it now. It's like they were saying, I was talking to my parents the other day and they're like, oh, I said, remember those old cabinets you had when I was a kid? They were like from the 60s and they were pretty bad. But I said, I have this strange fondness for them now. And I saw them come up at, they were at a secondhand store and I was like, oh, I'm so tempted to buy just one, Somewhere in my house just have one of this
coming in your remodel.
Yeah.
Pink cabinets, retro.
Retro, wouldn't that be lovely? I should get some shag rug too, because we had that. Yeah. Yellow and orange shag rug. Yeah.
Well, Ashley, it's now 7.
Okay.
And I just want to say that it's been a wonderful conversation with you. And we could go on and on and on because I know we could. And we're so, it's just wonderful to talk with you. And I think we have really good conversations. And every time I talk to you, I learn more and more about your work and the different layers of information and how much you draw from the history, the wealth of knowledge that you hold as well. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share and give of yourself to our community and to our museums through your physical labor, through your mental labor and your written work, and through, most importantly, the work itself. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with everyone in our community. I appreciate it very much, and the museum does as well.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Without the opportunity, there's no installation, there's no work. So it's nice to be able to have you guys part of that piece, because I consider the whole space as part of the piece, not just the red and all of that. Thank you very much.
We're excited to be part of your history now. So thank you so much. And I guess both of us can say farewell to our audience. And thank you so much to those of you who tuned in. Come by the museum. The exhibition ends on February 11th, 2022. Come by to pick up your exhibition catalog, which is available for purchase in our gift shop. And also, before we close, Ashley, is there something coming up for you that people should know about?
I have some shows that are ongoing. If you happen to be in Minnesota, Tennessee, Alabama, any of those, they're long-term shows. And then in this November, I'll be back in Montgomery, Alabama to do an interior installation. It'll be 30 feet tall, 30 feet tall of the Keeping Up appearances. So that's going to be a big one. A lot of work there, but it'd be great. It'd be nice to get that into this really huge. I get to pull out the 25-footer again, which has only been up once before. So yeah, so that'll be fun. But I don't go up that high, so
oh, you'll have amazing help
somebody else
with everything.
yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, we're excited.
But yeah, that's it.
We're excited to see more of your work, and we are grateful to have you here. So thank you so much, and thank you to all of you who tuned in, and we'll see you soon. Have a wonderful night. I'm going to go ahead and stop this. It's kind of a strange process here.
Yeah. That's funny.
Good night, everyone.